now.
Hello and welcome, everybody. So sorry for the technical difficulties we were having. I'll tell you what, you had all these things together, and sometimes the mix doesn't come up right, and you got to start all over again. So, hello to everybody. Come on and join us in the live chat. I am Sysco Murdoch, and I am from Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal podcast. And you may have heard my guest on my show, the one we have tonight, and we're just really glad to have everybody coming in here. And we've got a little from my podcast, and we have some from his podcast, and we have all you wonderful people here on Missing Persons and Mysteries. And we'd like to thank Bill for loaning us his living room tonight so I could bring in my guest tonight. Now, you all know him, you know his voice very well, you know some of his stories. And we thought it'd be really nice to get him interviewed on this channel. And without further ado, I give you one of my best friends in the world, one of the best storytellers, somebody you can pick his brain on just about any subject, and he's going to come up with a story for you. So without further ado, I bring you Mr. Steve Stockton.
Hello, Sysco. Boy, what an introduction. Thank you. I wish I had a better act for you now.
I know, it sounds funny. We had so many technical issues trying to get in here, but we got the fire roaring. We got the crickets going, and we have the listeners, and they're coming in now. So I'm going to ask all the listeners, come on into live chat. Let us know, has there ever been a question you wanted to ask Steve? Or myself, or if you just want to talk about, you had a question about ghosts or strange phenomena or something that you saw that was pretty doggone strange in the woods, you come on in here and I'll try to get your questions through. But I thought it would be really nice. What you may not know is Steve has been writing books for a while, and he's been writing down stories even longer. And like myself, we've been interested in all of the strange and wonderful and uncanny and WTF subjects out there. And Steve and I met several years back over a long phone call, and we found out we had a lot in common, and it was just wonderful to talk to a like-minded person. And I'm sure everybody here in the chat feels the same way. When you get to sit down and talk to somebody about this subject, it's just fascinating. So here we go. Steve has been the guest on many shows, coast to coast, here recently with George Norrie and many other fantastic podcasts. And he's got a new book. It's a compilation of his stories called Strange Things in the Woods. And I thought we could touch on some of those subjects and see what you think. How about that, Steve?
That sounds good to me. If there's anything I enjoy almost as much as writing and telling stories, it's going on and talking about them. So glad that you had me on here tonight. Bill wanted me to come on and talk about my books, and I felt weird just coming on by myself. I didn't want to interview myself, so to speak. So I thought, well, Sysco, we're good friends, known each other for years and years. And in fact, I got her started writing. Soraya Askath of Where Did the Road Go got us together, and I encouraged her to write her stories down. She's got a book out there now that I did the color commentary on. It's called, I'll let you do the title, Sysco, because I always trip over it.
Children in the Wilderness of the Afterlife. And it's a guided tour through a haunted life. So
it's a great book. She did the heavy lifting. I just she wouldn't write a book unless I came along with her, so I kind of did the color commentary, and then each chapter I'd do a little Steve's take on it at the end of it. But it's a good book, regardless of my part in it. But I'll be sure and check that out.
Well, thank you. And all of the books are available on Amazon. They're in Kindle form and in paperback, so that's great. But we're here to talk about yours, and it's just amazing, the stories. Now, I know from experience and knowing you that what you started out doing was just collecting stories from people who were willing to give you their accounts of finding strange things or odd things in the woods, and some of them are scary, and some of them, if you imagine yourself being in that position, having it happen to you, it's pretty darn odd, and it'll throw you back quite a bit. Some of them, I don't know how they got through it with such a mess. But the thing is not all of them are, like a Bigfoot or a cryptid that you could really put your finger on. Some of them are just odd objects. Like, you imagine, how in the world did something get here, or just a regular everyday object acting odd? And I think that those are just as interesting, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of like some of the stuff that Charles Fort cataloged. He wrote about cryptids and things like that, but in the Forteana, he also wrote about falls of coins or falls of stones or falls of fish or things that came out of the sky in particular. That's where the whole cryptid thing comes from, is something that's where it's not supposed to be, like cryptozoology, when you have animals that are out of place. Like back in the 50s, there was a kangaroo sighted happily bounding through a cornfield in Tennessee. Well, kangaroos aren't native to Tennessee by any means, so how did it get there? So that's the type of stuff I enjoy in that regard. And yeah, some of it is paranormal or supernatural in nature, but some of the stories are just weird, just strange things. I mean, anything can be strange depending on your perspective, I suppose.
Right, and how you come upon them too. So now let's go back a minute and tell everybody you're from East Tennessee, and like you said, like right near Knoxville. Now, I know I lived in rural Alabama for a short while, and it just seems there seems to be a difference. I mean, if I don't know who's listening, where you're at, but when you go in the woods, everything seems to start to change. It takes a few minutes once you get past the wood line, and then it's almost like going into a different world. And when you do that in rural Tennessee, or in the mountains of Kentucky or Alabama, or anywhere like that, it just seems so different. The sky is so much more beautiful, and I think a lot of people see, when you're away from all the city lights, the stars, it's just amazing, and you can really catch a lot of shooting stars and things like that. And I'm sure that that's why a lot of people see more things like a UFO, which is, as we know, just an unidentified flying object. You just don't know what it is. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a saucer. You just don't know what it is. But when you're in the woods and you've got all the trees around you and everything starts to quiet, and you start recognizing all the different sounds and the animals and the crickets like we have here tonight, or just a snapping twig, everything seems different. And I know that when you were collecting stories, or at least thinking about putting together your first book, you were asking people for their firsthand accounts of these odd things. And some of the chapters in there, just the names alone will get you. But one of the things that I really liked was, like we said, those objects that are everyday objects, but they're in an odd space. And anybody who's read any of your books or anything like that could pick some of them out. Like, I thought the blue and white ball that just appeared out of nowhere and landed in the pine trees with nobody else around. You've got acres and acres of nothing but woods. And the person who told the story seemed to look at the ball, and it kind of almost like he felt like it knew it. He had seen it, and it kind of went back behind the bushes, and then the pine burrows just kind of covered it back up. And something like that it's not scary, but it's odd.
Yeah, it has the potential to be scary depending on what it is, but that's just it. What is it? And in that case, yeah, the person, he was a boy at the time, was walking through the woods, and he said it looked like those old blue and white striped overalls like people used to wear, but it was about 3 or 4 feet tall, perfectly round, and he heard it coming through the woods, and then it just rolled up over on top of some small pine trees, and he said it was like it saw me at the same time I saw it, and he said it just kind of rolled backwards. So it was obviously sentient to some degree. It was under some form of control. He thought maybe it was his brother trying to scare him, but he thought, well, my brother, how would he come up with something that looked like that? But then when he did get home, and he didn't waste any time getting there, his brother was sitting at the table having dinner. So still have no idea what that was. And a lot of the stories at that point, when I first started collecting them, I hadn't even considered writing them down. I just like to hear a good story. And I was a late in life, unexpected baby. So when I'd go somewhere with my parents, it was me and the old folks. Nobody had kids my age. In fact, most of my parents and their friends were the age of my friends' grandparents. So so a lot of times I'd either just sit in the corner and read a book, or occasionally, you get a bunch of folks together, especially in the South. There's going to be some point spooky tales going to come up, or something kind of leading in that direction, and then I would kind of egg them on and say, well, you know any ghost stories? Have you ever seen anything weird? And some of them would even be kind of reticent to talk about things they had seen for fear of ridicule. And then, when they saw that you weren't going to laugh at them and that you're truly interested in what they were saying, then more stories would flow. But yeah, some of them you almost had to drag it out of them with a log chain to get the story. And it wasn't until at my grandmother's funeral that I thought, because I just saw her there in her coffin, I thought about all the stories and legends and superstitions and everything she'd told me, and I thought, all that's just right there, and it dies with her unless I carry on. And that was when I decided, I need to write these down. And I did it more like a journaling type thing, and didn't seriously set about writing it into book form until many years later. I had a long commute here in Portland. I had to take a bus, train, and a bus to get to work. It took about 2 hours. I was working a regular job at that time. And so I wrote the majority of the first two books on my iPad. The first book, all of it was written on the iPad during my commute. So I did make good use of that time, I guess. And it was fortunate in the fact that the first book did well enough, led to a second book, that I was able to not have to work a public job anymore. I've been able to write full time, particularly here in the last few years. And now that the books are out in paperback, they're reaching a wider audience. I've had librarians and schools and things like that say that they've ordered copies. It's available through Amazon, and you can get it anywhere books are sold. It's listed in Books in Print. You should be able to walk into any bookstore and order it. Now, I don't have the ISBN code off the back of it, but it has one. It's a real book.
And it feels good once you get your book in print. I remember the first time I opened the first box of books, and I mean, they smelled like books.
Yeah, it'd been in ebook format, for a while, and it's just not the same. And they've sent my author copies. I haven't got them yet, but I'm waiting for that. Yeah, that's going to be a good feeling to be able to open a box full of my books.
You just take a picture, just with a pile of books next to you. I mean, something you put your heart into. It's a lot. It's a piece of you. It really is. And in your case, your first couple ones were pieces of a lot of different people you had met. And I don't know what that feeling is like to have these people entrust you with their stories. But some of them, I'm telling you, it would be like pulling it out of them. What else to see? What did it look like? What did it feel like? That's a lot to get out of somebody. So it's really something to put together, a book with this many different stories from different people. So I'd like to say hi to a couple of people in chat. Hi to Larry. No, we're not having call-ins tonight, but if you put your question here, I'll try to get them in as best I can. And hey to Jim, to Terry Brown, Vez, hey, how you doing out there? Our lovely mod. Thank you so much for helping us with that. Love the bat. And see who else we got here. He is asking, when did the Bigfoot story start? Well, I can tell you there's going to be a lot of different creatures tonight and a couple other different and unexpected things. I don't know if Steve's ever seen a Bigfoot. I know I did at once. Well, I never saw his feet, so I can't tell you if it was a Bigfoot or not. But if it was a Bigfoot, it was a younger one, and it wasn't a scary experience. It was a sad experience for me, but and I've heard recently, in fact, 2 weeks ago, I heard a gentleman telling a story about a Bigfoot encounter that he had, and he said he got an overwhelming sense of sadness from it too. And Steve and I have talked about things like this before, and we've talked about whether it's a cryptid or an extra interdimensional being or something along those, or aliens, whatever you want to categorize things at, having the ability to almost telepathically hypnotize or control you in some way or put thoughts in your head. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But what do you think about that, Steve? It's a trip.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, it's you don't know what you know, it's like
It's true, but that really threw me for a loop when T was asking about when the Bigfoot story started. That just reminded me, like I said, just within the past week, it might have been within the last 2 weeks, I heard a story about, and the way the guy described it, I'm like, that's it. That's exactly the feeling. I mean, it was just overwhelming sadness and over.
I've talked about that. We hope that if they ever do find a Bigfoot, that it's deceased under natural causes on its own terms. I would hate nothing more than for them to capture a live one, because that's going to be a miserable existence. It's going to be poked and prodded and have blood taken from it and examined, and that would be horrible. So I hope if they ever do find one, it's already dead. I don't want them to kill one. But I've never had a sighting. I've been all around places where there have been sightings. Now I have heard them. I've heard the whoops and the tree knocks and the almost the yells, if you want to call it that. I have seen some footprints. That was here in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, just across the river from Portland in Washington State, a little ways up, and then back east. In the Jefferson National Forest along the the Appalachian Trail near Damascus, Virginia. There I heard a lot of tree knocks and things, that had stones thrown at me that time from about 3 different directions, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And from what I've talked to other people that have had similar experiences and things, that was Bigfoot or some kind of cryptid. A few of them warning me to carry on, get out of that area. So I didn't stick around. But I'd love to have a face-to-face or an eyewitness type sighting, but hasn't happened yet. But not for lack of trying. I spent as much time out in the woods as possible, and can't say a lot about it just yet because I signed a non-disclosure agreement. But there's a show about cryptids, a TV show coming up that I've been cast in, and we're going to be out in the wild looking for some cryptids, but it's unlike any cryptids that people normally look for. It's not Bigfoot or Dogman, anything like that. Some very, very different stuff, and look for that sometime soon. We should have already been in production with it, but because of the lockdown and everything, we've had to postpone it till later on and possibly this summer. But looking forward to that. I'm not much of an investigator anymore. I've done the paranormal investigations back in the 80s before it was the in vogue thing to do, and before everybody and their brother had a crew or a team. But I'm going to get back into it a little bit. They sent me over about 3 scripts, and I like what they were all about and what they were up to there. So that was the only reason I agreed to do it, because I don't want to do another, out in the woods looking for Bigfoot type thing. That's just not my style. I'm more of a storyteller. And I've even had people chide me on that. I've had people say, well, I like your stories, but there's no research there. You didn't go back into the area. Well, some of it you really can't. Like one story there about the haunted cabin, where a guy was out hunting ginseng, this in Middle Tennessee, walked by an old abandoned cabin, little one-room affair, is about to fall down, and he heard what sounded like, he'd already looked inside of it and saw that it was totally empty. Didn't have doors or windows, just holes where they had once been, probably just had oilcloth or something hanging over them at that. And as he walked away, he heard what sounded like a wooden chair being dragged across a wooden floor. If you've ever heard that, it's a very unmistakable sound. So he goes back, peeks in again, doesn't see anything, starts to walk away, gets a little ways out, and then this time he hears footsteps across the wooden floor. So he darts back over there and looks in, thinks maybe somebody's messing with him, somebody's trying to spook him, another ginseng hunter maybe. So he walks all around this little cabin. It's built on a foundation of just stacked stones at the four corners. And so he can look all the way under it. There's nobody under it. There's nobody in it. There's nowhere to hide. Starts to walk away again, and he hears a little girl's voice say, "Daddy?" And he said at that point, it was like, I just kept walking. He said, number one, I didn't have any children at the time, so if she's looking for Daddy, she wasn't looking for me. And he's like, I'd already wasted enough time. It was going to be dark soon. I was hunting ginseng. I don't have time to fool with haints, as he called them. And cause that I've been to the place where it was, but it's no longer there. I mean, that happened back in the 1920s or 30s. And so, what good would it do me to investigate there? I mean, maybe there's still something there. It did feel creepy when I was there, but I saw where the foundation had been. But it's not really that kind of stories. I'm not out there looking for evidence. I'm the storyteller. I'm a legend tripper when it comes to these. I just relate the stories. I tell them as they were told to me. I take them at face value. I'm not out to prove anybody wrong or to prove anybody right. It's, this is the story. This is what happened. This is what the person saw. And it's people that I implicitly trust that didn't have anything to gain. And like I said, sometimes are even hesitant to tell their stories for fear of ridicule. And if I thought somebody was just making something up or pulling my leg, as they say down south, I wouldn't have put that in the book. But for the most part, these are sincere. It's mostly older people that, like that gentleman, he was in his 80s at that time. And the only reason we're back in there where that cabin was, not only did he hunt ginseng, but there was an old dry creek bed back there where there were a lot of geode, which are round, bumpy-looking rocks with crystals inside them. And I wanted to go hunt geode, so he took me out there. And that's how I found out the story about the cabin, just by happenstance that time. He's like, walked up there and he's like, see that foundation? And yeah. And he's like, well, there used to be a one-bedroom cabin there, one-room cabin. And then he told me that story. And what had happened, the background on that, the whole family had been wiped out by, I think it was cholera or smallpox or something like that around the turn of the last century. But there you go. And it didn't scare him a bit. He was a tough old mountain man, first generation Irish-American, born to immigrant parents here. And they lived, I mean, we're talking hardcore Appalachia over on the Cumberland Plateau in Middle Tennessee, Fentress County. What's now the Big South Fork National Park, they were in that area. The farms there backed up into the Big South Fork on the Tennessee side, and the rest of it's on the Kentucky side. But he said the only thing he was scared of might be a snake, and he said, I'm not even afraid of a snake if I can find a stick or something to chase it off with. So, somebody like that. Now, he did tell me some other stories of some places that he wasn't real keen on going into, and I thought, well, if that's, the gentleman's name was Otto, and I thought, well, if it's somewhere Otto is afraid to go, I'm certainly not going.
That's right. Well, that's the thing, too. It's like we were talking about, if you can remember back when you were a kid and you were exploring or whatever, if you ever had a long walk through the woods, even if you're in a national park and there's other people around, the smallest things, even ordinary things, can be just creepy because of where they're placed. And I know we talked about the blue and white ball, which I just thought was an odd, funny story, but if you're in that person's in their position, it's just, there's usually a feeling that comes along with these things. It's not just visualizing the object doing a thing or in an odd spot. It's usually a surrounding energy with these different odd things that happen. Now, some of them that are just so odd, different things that people have told you that they found in the woods, and they gave you the story around it, was like the surfboard out of nowhere that just fell through the trees, and there's no plane, there's no...
Yeah, now how do you explain that? And I've seen the surfboard. I knew the guy very well that it happened to, and that was his story, that he was out in the woods and just kind of came up into a little clearing, and something in the sky happened to catch his eye. At first he thought it was part of a plane, or maybe even like a small radio-controlled plane or part of a hobby plane. But it turned out it was a surfboard. It was kind of just twisting, in the sky as it fell to earth. It was kind of spinning, and then he heard it crash through the trees, went over there, picked it up. It did have a pretty good sized chunk out of the nose of it, and he said apparently it got that when it fell through the trees. But again, it was clear sky, summer day, no planes or anything. He said he hadn't heard anything pass over, didn't see anything pass over, and yet here was a surfboard. Now that's almost like one of those Charles Fort type things, how did it get in the sky? Why did it fall here? And it was the company that made the surfboard was Wave Riding Vehicles. We looked it up, and they're headquartered in somewhere in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. I think it was Kitty Hawk or somewhere like that. So there had been a storm over on the coast a day or so before. So you wonder, did those high winds pick up a surfboard and get it up in the jet stream, and it just happened, all the conditions hit just right, and it made its way inland a few hundred miles to Tennessee. Who knows? Fall off a truck and become somehow airborne? Did it get tossed out of a plane? Who knows? But again, it's weird to think about.
Right. I've often wondered what's happened to things that got picked up by a tornado. I was in Alabama. We had a really bad, I believe it was like an F4, and it took out an entire apartment building and a shopping mall that was next to it. One of those stores in there was a jewelry store, and they were finding gold necklaces hanging in trees, 50 miles away. I mean, it's just amazing. You think it goes up, it's got to come down somewhere. And that could explain a lot of these things, but it's not going to explain an organ that went flying over somebody's head while it was playing music, or, a fresh cow pile, a cow poop, third floor of a barn. I mean, how did that get up there? Because how did the cow?
Both those stories in my books, the flying organ, that's a strange one that happened to some relatives of mine when they were boys. This would have been back in the 30s or so. Summertime, they'd finished their chores on the farm and were a couple of miles from the house, wading in the creek. I think they're actually sitting on the bank with their feet in the creek. It was hot. And they heard what sounded like a church organ. And this would have been like an old pump-style organ. It came up across the ridge where they were at, over the top of the ridge. Said they heard it pass directly over them. Again, it was a clear sky day. There wasn't any airplanes or anything around. And certainly at that time in flight, there probably wasn't anything that would have been carrying a pump organ and a church organ on it. And they heard it fly right over where they were and then pass over and continue on up the next ridge and across the ridge and down the other side and out of earshot. And they said that it was playing a tune. It wasn't just, notes. There was a melody to it, but they didn't recognize the melody. Now, they weren't necessarily church-going folk. And at that time, the only church over there was under a bluff. It was in a cave. It was called Meeting House Rock. And it was just it'd been an old Indian bluff, which is kind of like a half cave that's just under the side of a bluff. And they had log pews in there and things, and that was the only church they had, and there wasn't any music or anything in there unless somebody, had a guitar or banjo or something like that. It was just mainly preaching. And wouldn't have been any churches with a pump organ for miles and miles around. Probably you'd have to go to Nashville or somewhere to find something like that, and that's 150, 200 miles away. So who knows what it was, but they heard it fly over, knew that it was the sound of an organ.
Isn't it?
And then the cow pile, that was on what had been a dairy farm that there had been a river behind it. They dammed the river up and made a lake, left us what had been a dairy farm underwater. The barn was sitting on about a quarter acre of land. Big old barn, had several different lofts up in it. Well, up on the third loft, kids were up there looking around, just as they'd been climbing up in the loft and messed around. The barn hadn't been used in decades. And again, this was out in the country. And if you're a country kid or been around a farm or cows, you know what a cow pile looks like. I mean, it's unmistakable. There's not any other animal that leaves scat, if you will, like a cow. But here it was up in the third loft of the barn, which was just a partial loft, a fresh cow pile. And they got a stick and poked it and everything, like, yep, that's cow dump right there. But how'd it get there? I mean, a barn that hadn't had any cows in it in, like I said, at least a decade or more. And even when there had been cows there, and it was a working farm, there wouldn't have been any way to get a cow up there, any reason to put one up in the loft. But yet there it was. Where'd it come from? How did it get there? And it was fresh. That was the equally weird part.
Well, that's the thing, and there's multiple chapters and stories like that within your book. I mean, you're going to read about floating coffins and this angel hair that just disintegrated. Get that and read those and read them in the accounts of the people that actually saw it, and try to put yourself in their shoes if you're walking up and you're seeing some of these odd objects in the woods. And I mean, I've found objects that had no place, usually in Alabama or Tennessee or here in the Pine Barrens. We see all kinds of strange things, but there's a story in the book that it has got to be the oddest thing that was ever found in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Now, we've got the Jersey Devil. We've got all kinds of crazy things happening out here. But the oddest thing I think that was ever found, tell us a little bit about that one, Steve. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yep, absolutely. It was a pizza, a fresh pizza. I guess if you can have fresh cow poop in the top of a barn, you can have fresh pizza out in the middle of the woods in the Pine Barrens. Yeah, a friend of mine, him and his friends would go out there and just kind of bum around. And, I mean, the Pine Barrens, it's just that. It's, pine trees and scrub, and there's been all kinds of rumors. They've found bodies out there, supposedly a mafia dumping ground. You've got the Jersey Devil. You've got nearby stuff like Clinton Road and other haunted locations. But it's, it's a great place to go and just hike and be in creepy sort of woods. Well, they came across, said, a fresh pepperoni pizza sitting out in the woods. I think it was still in the box, but the box was open. They could see what it was. They said it was almost like it was a trap or something. And I read a story about a lady that was missing in the woods that had gotten lost. And she said that she would see somebody had put donuts in the trees and things like that, almost like they were trying to lead her into something. So it's like there's something that's intelligent that's out there, but not quite intelligent to pull off what it's planning. And the same guy was telling me that another time, and he told me that when he was telling me the pizza story. He said another time they were in the Pine Barrens, and they saw a guy off in the distance wearing nothing but a clown mask and tube socks, carefully picking his way through a briar patch. And all he said was that's a story, another story for another time, and I never got to hear that story. I mean, that was obviously somebody, but bare naked except for tube socks and a clown mask and a briar patch. That can't be a good thing any way you think about it.
That's absolutely true. That made me go the other way, that's for sure. But isn't that something, though? It's possible that something is out there, I mean, out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, if you've ever walked through the Pine Barrens, it's barren, except for pines. That's how it got its name, and it's off the beaten trail, and all of a sudden you just see a fresh pizza in a box laying there open. It's almost like
it's just waiting for you. And we talked about that before, how there's been different things that like have the black-eyed kids, and before that you had the men in black that would come and want to talk to you and want to come into your home, and then you had the black-eyed kids phenomena. Well, everybody likes kids, let us in, and then you had the phantom clowns. Everybody likes clowns. Again, it's like there's something out there that's trying to infiltrate, trying to lure people in, but it's not quite smart enough to know that, people like children, but not ones with black eyes that talk really strangely, or clowns that come out of the woods with a hatchet. And I told somebody once, if I ever go missing, it's because they decided to use the bikini models with pizza and heavy metal albums, and I let them in.
Let them in, right? They got you. We've got a couple things here in the chat. Piper said that making you feel sad is a trick to get you closer to them. Well, apparently pizzas and donuts could be as well. I think that's very true. I can only speak from my experience. I can tell you I felt this. I was driving in the car, cornfields on both sides. My son was in the passenger seat, and I got an overwhelming, really, as an empath, I can tell you it was like just depression just encircled me, and a heavy feeling on my chest, and just this complete sadness. I mean, I didn't know I don't know how to describe that. I mean, if you've ever walked in a room and a friend of yours or a relative had been crying, and before you even see the relative, when you walk in the room, you know that something like that is going on there. It's just an emotional, like an emotional heavy blanket that just hits you. Like I said, I've heard other people getting stuff like that. I'm not 100%, not an expert, but I can just tell you how I felt. Um, Somebody else had something in here. They were saying could have been a portal. John said that it could have been unicorn dung instead of cow. It's possible. Yeah,
Maybe it would have to have glitter in it, I think.
but just hey to everybody in the chat. We're going to try to get these. I'm having a hard time seeing the chat, but I'm going to get to them as I can. And thank you for everybody for being here. Hit the like for Bill and for missing persons and mysteries, and thank them.
Yeah, be sure to hit like and subscribe. I've narrated some other stories for the channel that are coming up this week. Bill's been having computer issues. He's getting that resolved as we speak. When I talked to him just before we went on the air, he was at Best Buy trying to get things straightened out. So we got some more stories coming up. I've got another compilation of listener stories. We just came out with number 2, and there's a third one in the works. And then I've got some stories. Got one special one coming up from a new author that I'm encouraging to write and do more stories. I've got one of his stories over on my channel, 13 Past Midnight, that I just released the other day. It's Smoking Ghost in the Delta 88. Really, really cool true ghost story over there. That same author, Terry R., he's got another one that's about a ghostly camping trip. I'm going to put that on this channel. So that's coming up later this week. I've still got to record it. And sorry, my voice is a little scratchy. This has been one of the worst allergy seasons I've ever had. And I have seasonal allergies, pollen and things like that bother me. And that was Mr. Melder having a shake over there. But I've been kind of hoarse the last few days, and just tried to work through it. And I put out the video for the channel the other day, and I thought, man, I'm probably going to get some nasty comments about my voice. I went in and looked at it, and people were like, giving me accolades for my voice. I don't like my voice. I never have. I've gotten accustomed to it. I can tolerate it now. But I get a lot of people tell me that it's soothing, and they like to listen to me to go to sleep and things like that. So, Lord help you, but right on, I guess. As long as I think I sound like an educated hillbilly.
Just try, man. You know.
That's what I am.
Try
so
to get these stories out and just tell them as best you can. And I've always liked your voice, so there you go.
And I like to talk, so there you go. I probably like talking better than I like writing. But I write 4 hours a day and I read 4 hours a day, and I'm blessed to have that. That's my job. That's my work day. I do it from home. Kind of a hermit by nature. This quarantine really hasn't affected me. I've been self-isolating for years. I've been practicing for this for a long time. So, but I do hope everybody's staying safe and pulling through there. They're starting to ease things up here in Oregon. Actually had restaurants and things open back up. I had a neighbor bring me dinner from a Chinese restaurant last night, and that was first Chinese I've had in a couple of months. First restaurant meal I've had in a couple of months. So glad to see things going back that direction. Everybody's doing well
before too long. But okay, let me talk to this one. There's a couple chapters, actually several, that have homes. Basically homesteads, either a cabin that just popped up out of nowhere, and that's easy enough to explain. Of course, there's always been things here before we were here. I mean, you can often see when you go down the road that there was a certain landscaping that's now an open field. A house used to be there, But when you're going through the woods and you find some of the houses like are in these chapters that you have, one of them that has always been one of my favorite stories is the Victorian house. And they found this house in the middle of nowhere, and it was a family, wasn't it? It was more than one person that was walking through the house, and
it was 2 couples. That was my cousin and her husband, and another married couple. Her husband was in the military, and the her female friend, her husband's in the military too. They were stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and they decided to go out camping one weekend, the two couples. And yeah, in the middle of the woods somewhere in North Carolina. I've never been to the location. I've heard her tell the story several times. But yeah, they found this old Victorian style house out in the woods, kind of overgrown, but it was in still good enough shape. Then they opened the door. It was unlocked. They went in, and she said, Steve, it was just like stepping back in time. It was like the people that had lived in that house had just stepped out. She said there was clothing laid out on the beds like they were getting ready for, going to get ready to go to church or something. There was place settings still in the kitchen. There was the china and silverware on the table. And so there was no food. There wasn't any fire in the fireplace or anything like that. But she said, and it just had this eerie feeling like somebody had just left and would be right back. But yet they had been gone since, I think she said the calendar on the wall showed a date, and this would have been in the 1960s. The calendar on the wall in the kitchen showed like a date in, I think it was around the turn of the last century, like the early 1900s or something. And she's like, was it possible that this cabin could have sat untouched for, 40, 50 years or more? And they even went around, the men did, and checked the walls to see if there was like some kind of secret passage or a secret room or something that the people had unfortunately gotten trapped in and had perished, but they didn't find anything like that. They even took a few things out of the house that you felt weird about doing that. Like, it's like, felt like just going up and breaking into somebody's house, but it was abandoned. There was nobody around. And then at one point, after this was all over, the men decided to go back. The women got kind of spooked with the whole thing and didn't want to go back. Didn't want anything to do with it. So the fellas went back on their own, and they weren't able to find the place. And they knew the spot. They went where they knew it was. There was no house there. They tried on a couple different occasions, could not relocate it. Went, miles out of the area and searched back in. Nothing there. And they even asked some locals. There was like an old country store or something that they stopped at that wouldn't have been too far. And one person there that they asked told them, I never heard of anything like that. And then the guy behind the counter got kind of upset with him and said, don't come in here asking stuff like that. Just, go on, don't worry about it. Just forget you ever saw anything because there's not anything there. But obviously there was some kind of local legend or some tragedy or something, makes you think of these, like the Brigadoon, the Irish story, where the town only appears every so many years or something like that. Was that house like that? Was it a time slip? Was it the site of some unspeakable tragedy that just happened? And there's a lot of weird plants in North Carolina. They have pitcher plants and things like that, which are plants that are designed to lure insects in and catch them. And I even thought about, what if that was like some kind of a extra dimensional pitcher plant? It looked like a house to lure these people in and was going to eat them, going to swallow them, but they got out before. Who knows?
Well, that's just
your imagination tends to run wild
with these types of stories. You don't know, because if somebody had grabbed the pizza and you wouldn't know because it'd be gone. And I think that's, or if the house did take somebody, they wouldn't be here to tell the story. And often, when I'm talking on my podcast or whatever, and I have guests and I'm asking them things, that's just it. Like, I had a lady come on and say, well, we know there's been no perfect murders. I'm like, how would you know?
Yeah, the perfect ones are the ones that have been discovered yet.
And why we're
just, I want to give a couple of shout outs here in the chat. John Sergei, thank you for being here. Vez, thank you for modding. You guys are great. And see, Terry Brown is in the chat there. If you go and listen to the story that's on my channel now about the smoking ghost in the Delta 88, he's the author of that. And he's got another really, really good story that's about some strange experiences he had while camping that'll be on this channel a little later in the week. But he's a fantastic writer. He's just starting out. I'm encouraging him any way that I can. Mark Anthony Wyatt can tell you about that, and so can Sysco. Those are two people that got started after they read my books and thought, well, I've got stories, maybe I should tell mine too. And I've tried to encourage as many people as I can that if you know these tales, it's up to you to write them down, because if you don't pass them along, or even if you do pass them along, I mean, I've told my daughter some of these stories and stuff, but likewise, things that were told to me, if I didn't get a lot of the details, you forget things. Things tend to disappear in the mists of time. So if you know these old stories, write them down. If nothing else, just leave the written legacy for your progeny.
There you go. That's the whole reason you talked me into writing my book, because, well, that and the fact that I wanted to write down the things that had happened to me so other people could compare their experience that they had to something that maybe I had. And when I was younger, that was what was important to me, because I couldn't talk about this with just anybody. Things have changed. Things have changed in the past 10 years, let alone the past 50. So, we weren't able to talk about stuff like this. I think that's probably why you felt a lot of reluctance from people to tell you their odd stories, because they don't want people to think they're crazy, and they don't want to get a reputation if they're in a small town. That's the guy who saw the UFO. That's the guy who saw the Bigfoot. You got to go through all that. Nobody needs that in their life, and they just clam up. Think of the amount of stories that people haven't told,
Oh yeah, that's just mind-boggling. There's some, that I've probably forgotten bits and pieces of it. If I can't remember the whole thing, I don't write it down. I know that's the way you do as well, that if you can't remember all of it, you just don't bother with it. Kind of set it aside until you come back, maybe do remember it. Occasionally I'll talk to somebody from back home, but most of the people like that, especially in my first book, just about everybody in that book has passed on. But now I started gathering those stories when I was in actually preteen, and then later on in my teen years. And I told the one gentleman I was talking about there that about the haunted cabin and knew where the geodes was. He knew the location of a silver mine which was haunted, and he had a lot of stories to tell. Well, I took an old, this was in the 80s, maybe late 70s, took an old cassette recorder over there and was going to record him, but he shied away from that. He's like, "No, I'll tell you stories, but I don't want my voice recorded." It was just, it just seemed alien to him. It really shut him down. So I didn't try that again. But I hate that, because I would love to have those recordings now, and I'd love to have been able to have recorded all the stories I've ever heard. Especially some of the ones from my grandmother. She died when I was 13. When I was little, though, I was scared to death of her. I mean, she was a self-described gypsy witch, and she knew superstition for everything. She could tell fortunes. She read tea leaves and coffee grounds, and practiced phrenology, which is, you can tell things about a person by the bumps on their head. It's kind of a lost art now, but she knew a lot of spooky stories and legends and things. But I was scared of her when I was little. But I wish I'd had another 13 years with her. I would have got some really good stories there. So I want to say hi to Sarah Jane there from the UK, and I noticed somebody else pop in from Wales. So got a good international audience going on here.
And I'm sure,
and Dungoist, I hope I'm saying that right. Glad
hello,
to have
everybody.
you here.
Thanks for coming in. This is something that's global too. All around. I can't imagine what it's like in the UK to walk around those castles and all that stuff, But we were talking about houses that just pop up out of nowhere. I've got a little story that you might want to hear. The things that get me is, sometimes you'll get like a photobomb of an inanimate object like a house. Like there was this couple was taking picture just standing by a tree. Well, this was back when you got your photos developed. You had to send them to the little photo mats. Or remember those little photo mats? You just drive up things, you drop off your film, and you get your pictures and stuff. You have to wait, and it took about 2 weeks, and you get your pictures out of the envelope. You start looking at them, you see what came out. I mean, that's something that's gone now, huh? Everybody's
pretty much. I remember we had the neighborhood where I lived. There was a little one called the photo bug, and it was just a tiny little thing about the size of a closet. And you drove up and handed your picture film to them, and then you can come back a week later and get your pictures.
In the 70s, they were everywhere. They were in all those little parking lots of these malls and stuff. Or you dropped them off at the drugstore or whatever. It was a big deal. But
Yeah.
and that's when you'd see you got either, sometimes a ghost would show up in a picture you didn't see, or in this case, I've heard several different stories of houses. Like, was that house there when we took this picture? I don't remember seeing a house. Everybody tried to figure out, but by then you got to figure, you go on your vacation or you go on your little trip and, camping trip, you take your pictures, you wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, this is when this stuff pops up. You might not be able to just jump in the car and go back and see if it was there. So those things were would really start a lot of stories, and a lot of people just, wondering what the heck happened because nobody remembered ever seeing that house there. There's another story of people being lost. I've got two of them where people were lost and came across a cabin or a house or something like that, tried to see if there was anybody there that could help them, and nobody was there. They finally get out of the woods, like you said, go down to the general store, the town next to it, and start mentioning, well, there was this house, whatever. No house was ever there. But this one got me. It was a story of a young lady, I believe she was about 13 or 14, and she had to go stay with her grandparents. Her grandparents was, kind of lived in a rural area. And she brought a bike with her because you could go down to ride down to the general store, which is, I don't know how far away, but not too far. And they warned her. They said, you stay on this side of the lake. You can go to the store. You can do this, or you can go down to. She had a friend that lived a couple of houses down a gravel road anyway. And well, just like a lot of teens, I know I was this way. You tell me not to do something, it's the first thing I want to go do. And she wound up going on the other side of the lake and around and down the path through the woods and all. Well, she was gone for quite a while. And she came across what she described was she thought that it was the town as it was, and then they had just moved the town over, like closer to the road, and let that town go to what you would call a ghost town. Everything was dilapidated, and there was no people, of course. There was no sign of life except at this one. It was kind of like a cabin, general store looking thing. And she saw somebody walk from the porch and go into the door. So, of course, she rides her bicycle up there, and she wanted to see, what was going on. And, was there anything she could buy or get something to drink? She was getting really thirsty. So she goes in and she pushes the door open, and there's some teens in there. Now, she said that there was a girl sitting, on like a whiskey barrel or something, and there was 3 boys. And she said it was so odd the way they were dressed, because this was, I'm going to say probably 10, 15 years ago, but everybody that was in that store looked like they were in the 70s. They were, either bell bottoms and bare feet. Some of them had long hair and love beads. And one of the things that she described was that they were wearing T-shirts that she knew. Like you can go and buy classic T-shirts now, but they look different. They look new. They don't look like the old classic Led Zeppelin or, like you went to the concert kind of T-shirts. She said that it looked similar but different. She said it just looked like they had gone to the concert. So one of them spoke to her. The other ones wouldn't even look at her. And there was something to do with they were drinking pop or something out of the bottles. And this one kid was drinking like something that looked red, like it wasn't a cherry Coke, but might have been like, what were those things, like Fantas? Remember those different fruit-flavored sodas that we used to have back in the day?
Yeah.
And it was something red in a glass bottle. And she said, well, I just popped in to see if this was a store. I wanted to buy something to drink. I'm thirsty. And the kid walks up to her and then lifts his head and looks at her. She said, he spoke very creepy, like we would say now, black-eyed kids talk. Very broken, almost like a broken English way. And, instead of saying, are you thirsty? They're saying, like, is it thirst time? Like that kind of weirdness. And he hands her the drink. And when he hands it to her, she notices his face looks different. She's got it in her hand. And she just, when she looked into his eyes and the mouth, the way he smiled, his teeth were all pointy and jagged. And he kind of like, at the same time she noticed it, he noticed her noticing it. And that's what scared her. And the cherry pop or whatever went down her shirt. So she had a red stain running down her shirt. And she drops the bottle. She goes running out. She goes to get on her bike. And she notices that she's getting on her bike. Everything was fine with the bike. And the kid's on the porch now. And he says, but you have a flat tire. And she looks and the tire's flat. And it wasn't before he had said it. Or at least she didn't notice. So this kid leaves her bike and takes off running. And as she's running, she looks behind her. She sees all the kids come out of the store and they're standing in the street, in the gravel road. And as she's running, she looks back again. Now all the kids are gone, the town is gone, and that one kid is just standing in the road. And she said after that, I didn't look back. And as she's running to her grandparents, she gets to the grandparents' house. She's trying to explain what happened to him. She's convinced herself it was just a dream. She was imagining the whole thing. And as she's telling her grandmother, she looks down. She's got the red stain still running down her T-shirt. Explain that one. Right?
And I've heard similar stories of people that were like traveling, either before the interstate or they had decided to take one of the old state highways and had stopped in maybe a roadhouse or a little restaurant or something where they had a good meal. It was really cheap, but the people seemed odd or off, or they dressed funny or whatever, like you were talking about. And then maybe when they passed back through going the other direction, they intended to stop again, only to find the place closed and looking like it hadn't been open for years, or maybe completely gone, and asked somebody at the gas station down the street, oh yeah, there used to be a restaurant there back when my mom and dad were kids. Things like that. You wonder, is that a time slip, or what's happened in cases like that? Is there? So I've heard that more than one occasion.
But it does sound like now, I heard that a couple of years before I started hearing a lot about the black-eyed kids. And, each time you hear about the black-eyed kids, there's similar traits to it. The way they speak is like very broken. Like, she said it was, instead of "Are you thirsty?" it would be, "Is it thirst time?" or something like that. I can't remember the exact words, but it was just off and creepy. And you wonder, we didn't stay the same. So if there is something extra dimensional or is something like that that's trying to make some kind of communication with us, of course they would change. I'm sure if there were black-eyed kids, 30 years ago, they probably weren't going around wearing black hoodies. They just weren't popular then. It seems like they're trying to fit in. So that's possible that it was something like that. It could have been ghost kids. It could have been vampire kids. I mean, what's with the teeth? Who knows? But that whole thing for a town to change like that, just disappear.
It's like a town of Amish vampire kids.
Yeah, but
blend several genres
right?
there.
I mean, like we said, you're just walking in the woods, and then everything changes. It seems like your whole persona, everything that you are is getting used to the nature being around you, and you're kind of calming. It's very calming, and then all of a sudden something like this happens out of nowhere. It switches.
Yeah. And one seems to precede the other. Like, I know you and I have talked about when you're out in the wilderness and everything will go quiet, and what an unsettling feeling that is. I'm talking, you can't hear the wind, you can't hear water anywhere, you can't even hear birds in the trees. It's like somebody just turned a big volume knob and everything went, deathly quiet, like being in a vacuum. Anytime I've ever had that happen, I've gotten out of whatever area I was in. I've talked to other people other outdoorsmen, even hunters and things, will experience that sometime, where it just goes deafeningly silent, and then it kind of comes back in levels, like the volume's just slowly being turned back up. You hear the wind again, you hear the rushing creek down the hill, you hear the birds in the trees. I don't know what that's all about.
I've always called it a sound vacuum. I've had that happen, I'm going to say, at least 3 or 4 times, where you're out there and everything changes. Somebody in the chat asked earlier, can you describe that feeling? And it's almost like you can't describe it. You're walking along, looking at all your surroundings and the scenery and enjoying nature, and then all the sound kind of goes out. And like I said, a sound vacuum, like a vacuum just sucked all the sound out of everything, and the atmosphere changes around. It's almost like the pressure changes around.
Yeah, almost to me, I get like almost that fight or flight response. Like, this, I got to get out of here. This doesn't feel right. And it's happened to me mostly in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which sits on the border of East Tennessee and North Carolina. But that's could be just it's happened so much there because that's where I've been more than anywhere else. I grew up in that area and spent a lot of time in those mountains and along the paths and trails there. The Appalachian Trail goes through there, and that's another thing about Appalachia. You have a lot of little ghost towns like you were talking about, especially in the areas where coal mining was popular because the company would come in, set up the mines, they'd build little houses, little stores. A lot of times they would pay the miners in scrip, which was only good at the company store. And I've heard stories of people having a reality check about that when they go to somewhere else and try to spend that coal mine scrip. It's like, no, this isn't any good here. You got to take it back. And so literally the mine owned you and owned your family, owned your house. They gave you the money that you could only spend in their stores. But then when the coal ran out or something happened, they just pull up, leave, gone, and they leave all those little mining shacks and houses and stuff just to rot. And the earth reclaimed a lot of that. I've been in some areas, particularly in southeastern Kentucky. There's an area in Yamacraw that I've got a story about. That place is very actively haunted. And I've talked to some locals there that have had some strange experiences there. But yeah, as far as the silence, that deathly calm, I don't know what that's all about, but it feels otherworldly. It feels supernatural, beyond the norm for
Yeah.
sure.
Just like
And
we talked about before,
there's been
though, with you can't prove if you don't stop what you're doing and undo it or go back. And I mean, that's what I've been taught to do. When I had my elders around, and they were talking about going through the woods, and you get up to like there's different levels, there's different information that you on your journey you're allowed to know at this point. When we start talking about certain things in the woods or certain things out there we don't talk about because their energy can connect into yours, and now they know them, they'll come around like skinwalkers and windows and things
yeah,
like that. But
almost like a tulpa. Yeah, there's certain things that you don't talk about there because you can draw it to like the raven mockers and things like that.
exactly.
I think it's more the elders that tell you that not to talk about it because some of the younger people will talk about stuff like that, almost daring it, to come after them. And you have Spearfinger and some of those tales. Now, that's not in any of my books yet, but I've got a really good version of Spearfinger over on my channel that's been very, very popular video. Now I've got another book in the works about the Great Smoky Mountains. It's the myths and legends of the Smokies, and a lot of Cherokee stories in there. And that's I don't know now when that'll be out. Probably I'd like to have it out by late summer of this year. Got that and a book of just pure ghost stories that I'm working on.
That'll be good. I can't wait. I can't wait till that one comes out. You know me and ghosts, that's my favorite thing, right? But yeah, and
Yeah.
somebody in the chat here is saying that they heard that when it gets quiet like that, Sandra said that's when the Bigfoot is around. And I've heard that as well, and I can't discredit that at all. I mean, I'm certainly no expert, but I can
Yeah.
tell you just from, spending time, with the elders and trying to learn what they're trying to teach us. It's hard to go backwards sometimes to unlearn the things that we know to try to get with nature like that. And I can tell you that if you pay attention, the animals know. I mean, there's multiple just in your
Mhm.
own backyard. Pay attention. You'll hear the squirrels send out a signal of danger, and even a little tiny chickadee bird has like 27 different calls that it sends out to warn other animals. I think that's so cool because this tiniest little bird, they're the little ones that have like little bandit eyes. They're cutest little birds, but and
Mhm.
they almost as small as a hummingbird. But that little bird will send out all different warnings to the other animals in the area that there's a predator, and it has a different one for a hawk and for an owl and for a fox, and it's just amazing. So if you pay attention to that, so why wouldn't, if you're in the woods and everything goes quiet like that, there's a predator, but who's it after? You know what I mean?
I've got a story in the book there called The River of Game. Talks about just that. A guy was deer hunting. He was sitting in a tree stand, and he sees it. It starts out with the small animals like squirrels and birds, and then he sees everything coming through. There was like skunks and possums and deer, and I think even a bear or two. And just he couldn't figure out what was going on, but there was something in the woods that those animals knew of, and it was, I guess, some sort of apex predator, that they all fled and just did so without killing or eating each other. They were just all together and headed out.
Like you would almost see in like a Bambi movie when you see all the animals leaving or hear like
yeah, that's now that fire, I think, in that movie, and that happens too. A lot of times animals, particularly cats, are sensitive to earthquakes. They'll predict an earthquake by acting strange or even run away from home and things a few days before an earthquake's going to hit, and then they'll come back later. So I think animals, they have an intuition about them. I mean, you think about the guidance system that birds and things like that have, especially migratory species, that they're do they electromagnetic something or other? Is it just an innate sense of that? But there's been people that suggested that migrating geese and things like that follow the electromagnetic lines, the ley lines of the earth. And I know those are very popular, particularly in England. You follow those ley lines, and it'll be, an ancient site here, and then you follow a straight line, and there's Stonehenge. You follow that ley line, there's something else. It's all interconnected.
That's like I said too. It's about paying attention to nature. If you're going to be out in nature, you need to be paying attention. Any hunter will tell you that. They're all sensing everything that's around them, and you and I were talking another time. We were talking about portals and things like that, and I'm a firm believer. I'm really starting to lean on all the information that I'm trying to gather. These portals. I don't know if it has anything to do with the missing 411, the David Paulides stuff. I don't know, but I can't discount it. I don't know enough to say no way.
And there are places where you have that just a disturbing energy that kind of comes and goes. Video here on the channel, this channel, they have about Mount Shasta. There's a portal there. There's a vortex. There's an energy there. There's one in southern Oregon near Crater Lake, famous Oregon vortex. There's one in Sedona, Arizona. A lot of strange things there. There's one at Joshua Tree. Bill, the creator of this channel, he had an experience with some strange beings at Joshua Tree. There's a portal there. They exist and what they are, and you were talking earlier about some of the things that have gone on. I think it was at Skinwalker Ranch or somewhere like that, where how'd you describe it? Like the very fabric of time and space tore open and things walked out.
Exactly, and the witnesses could actually see into the other side, and it said it seemed like they could see trees and like a sky and everything, but everything had like a red hue to it, so it was almost like it had a filter of red over it. And so who knows, if you're looking through it, does that make it look red? Was the world on the other side or the other dimension actually red? Who knows? We're only guessing. But it was like it almost just, they actually physically saw it rip open, and then these creatures, hairy creatures, start crawling out of it. And I think on Skinwalker, I haven't been watching the episode, but I know David Paulides has been watching it, and he's trying to get something out of it too. But I mean, I think they're around more than just having a specific place. Of course, there's lots of lore and things, and people think that Stonehenge is a portal, and there's the famous one in Peru that they think it's a gate. They call it a gate, but what is a gate other than a portal? Or doorway. So I don't know, but I've been looking into this week. I've been really digging into a little bit more about the weather changing after a portal opens, and that just intrigues me, because if you think about the missing 411, it seems that after one goes missing like that, they have horrible weather all the time.
Yeah, that's a constant in all those cases, just about like the ones there in the Smokies that I like to talk about, the Dennis Martin disappearance. Boom, torrential rainfall. Trini Gibson goes missing in 1976. Same thing. Terrible weather blows up out of nowhere. And it's not just there. It's in a lot like the western states and the Cascades and places like that, the Rockies. Somebody goes missing, there'll be a freak snowstorm. There's just, is it a portal affecting the weather? Is it whatever controlling the portal can also control the weather? And then this week we had a story about translucent beings, or the Glimmer Man, as some people have called him now. And I had an experience of that in the city here in downtown Portland, Oregon, of something that looked like a human figure, but it was shimmering like heat waves that you see rising off the pavement in hot weather. This wasn't hot weather. It was cool evening. It wasn't cold out, so it wasn't steam or anything like that. But have a listen to that video on here about the translucent humanoids. It's Glimmer Man, or almost like the Predator that's in the Predator films. There's something out there in the woods that has a cloaking ability to some degree. You can still see the outline, still see the shadows. Some of them click, make clicking sounds. There was a lady who was a bow hunter who was up in a tree and saw one of those in another tree. Real famous case with that. So I think there's things out there. There's portals, there's whatever this is, and something that can hide, something that can cloak itself. That's probably going to be your apex predator. That's what the animals run from. And you think about it, maybe when those portals are opening or closing, or even if it's just a pure energy transference, that could account for the weather, that could account for the sudden silence and then reemergence of sound. I think it all ties in together somehow. I think there's some type of golden thread that goes through the Men in Black and Bigfoot and UFOs and the Black-Eyed Kids and this the Glimmer Man and the Flannel Man and Shadow People. I think there's some overlap there in all that. I don't think it's sort of like, in religion you have Baptists, you have Catholics, you have this. I think it's kind of the same thing, that these are just different flavors or different versions of something that's out there that all kind of works somewhat together to whatever means, but it's not of human origin or even necessarily from this dimension.
Well, that's 100%. And we just don't know. But I do think that a lot of this is all connected, and maybe we're not supposed to have the answers. Maybe we're supposed to find them out down the line. Maybe we're not ready for it. I don't know. But the only thing I do know, that just because we don't know how to cross over into their dimension doesn't mean that something else can't come over from another dimension. Maybe they know. I've always been a firm believer that in some ways Bigfoot is able to cross, or at least knows where the portals are, or something along those lines. Because when I was little, my grandmother used to tell us that we always thought, as Cherokees and Lenape, we always considered Bigfoot as a spiritual being and not an animal that was wild in the woods, or half man, half animal, or anything like that, but a spiritual. So it's half. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, he's kind of half here and half over there. And I'm like, where's over there? It's like, what do you...
who knows? But that would kind of make sense, And just like you have people that are good and bad, you have people that are benevolent, you have people that are malevolent, hell-bent on ill will and things. And I think it could be the same with those creatures, because you have Sasquatch or Big Feet, like over here in Washington State, just across the river, Ape Canyon, there in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. This is where the tribe, or whatever you want to call it, of Big Feet trapped these miners in a cabin for a day and tossed boulders at them and things. Of course, one of the miners claimed that he shot and killed one of the Bigfoots, so maybe that's why they were attacked. I don't know if that was before or after or during the attack. I made a video about that. I wrote the video and produced it for Unicorp's Tales channels. If you want to go watch that over there. But and then you also hear like the one that you encountered there, where there's almost a sadness, but I think that was a young one that had just gotten lost or separated, or maybe he had stepped through the portal and didn't know how to get back through, or something like that. Just that sadness in that picture that you've shown before, where it looks like it's about to trip over its bottom lip. It's pouting so hard, it's just
Exactly. And if you think about it, just if you step out of our, what we humans consider reality and open up that possibility that, we might be seeing some creatures come across here. Like, what is that one thing that everybody's talking about? The wrecker? Is that the rake, not the wrecker, the rake, and different things like this? Are these just things that are coming over and falling into the dimension and trying to find a way back? But on the same thing, all these missing people, they could be going through a portal or falling into a time
yeah.
slip.
Maybe they're appearing in some strange other dimension, and whatever lives over there saying, "Did you see that? There's something ran across the road. It was pink and hairy on top." But that's like, well, you and I have similar stories. One from your personal experience, where you and your mom were driving and ran over something in the road. And then I have a story in my book, and there's a narration of it on my channel, 13 Past Midnight, called "What Did We Run Over?" And it's very eerily similar in the circumstances and the way it came about, where people were driving. There was something that resembled a human or a humanoid figure crawling across the road, got ran over, and then they go back and look, and there's nothing there. Or maybe in my story, there was blood on the car, but they didn't find any kind of carcass or body. It was both in swampy areas. And one of the witnesses that was in the car behind said it looked like a person in a scuba suit, or a skin diving suit, crawling across the road. But that's not, that would have, you think, been reported if a skin diver had gone missing, and I don't think anybody would be out there in a swamp. I don't know. The people dive in the peat bogs, so I guess anything's possible.
It's just crazy.
But it makes you wonder, is that something where a creature, came through the portal just at the wrong moment, only to get hit by a car, some sort of traveler through time and space, and then whoops, splat, and then does it go back through the portal? People, I've heard conjecture that's why they've never found a Bigfoot, that they either don't die here, or if they do die here, they're somehow transported back to whatever dimension they live in, or where, like the elephant graveyard. There's supposedly places in Africa, on the African continent rather, where there's elephants that go to die en masse. And that they've never been able to locate that.
It's incredible. And I've heard multiple stories, a lot of them from anybody interested in this or learning more about portals and legends too. Barry Fitzgerald has an awful lot of stuff, and I listened to him tell a story about just, your people walking down a path, you're just walking a trail, you're just out there hiking, and this one guy went to take a step, and his hand went through something and came back out, like those movies or pictures or whatever you see, like you almost put your hand through a mirror and then pull it back out. It's like, whoa, what is that? Mm-hmm. And what does everybody do? They do it again. Well, what if you just walk in and bam, there's multiple cases of people out and walking in pairs, just walking, and then all of a sudden somehow they get split, where somebody lags behind a little bit. There's one story about a man who was walking with his girlfriend, and she was just kept falling a little bit behind. And he kind of weighed up on her, and, that went on for a little bit. And then the next thing you know, he looks back and she's gone. Now, this man looked for her for 4 hours. 4 hours. And it's getting ready to get dark. He's getting more panicked. He doesn't have a signal. There's no signal on his phone. He can't get through to her cell phone. And he decides what he's going to do is try to take a shortcut and get back to, the town or the civilization, wherever it was that they were. And he takes a right cut. And he figures if he does that, he'll be able to avoid going up and down the hill, and he'll just go around like to the valley part. And as he goes, he's about an hour away from where he was on the path, and he bumps into her by the lake. And she goes, "Where have you been? I couldn't find you." She had been where she got lost and where she wound up. It just didn't make sense. And she kept saying, "I could hear you. You couldn't hear me." Those kind of things, like the chapter in your book about the lost cow. The farmer that lost the cow, he could hear the cow. He just couldn't.
Yeah, he could hear the cow, but couldn't see it, couldn't find it, never did find it. But did find some sort of impressions in the ground about the size, he said, big around as pie plates, pie tins, where something had rested. And he kind of thought it was like maybe a UFO or something, but he wondered if they were using the sound of the cow or the calf to try to lure him into the woods, because when he get close to where he thinks it would sound farther off or a different direction. And he felt, that was like a cautionary tale that, don't follow strange noises out into the woods. And then likewise, that's one of the things in the Smokies with what they call the fairy lanterns or the fairy lights. There's been people that have been lost or have been out in the woods for whatever reason and see a light and start following that light, assuming it's another hunter or a hiker or what have you, only to one guy fell off a small bluff, like a 12 or 15 foot drop, and didn't kill him or anything, but it messed him up real good. Didn't do him any good, I'm sure. And he said, I watched the lantern going right along in front of me. I was following what I thought was another coon hunter, and I fell off the bluff, and the light just kept going. Went back the next day, found his gun. It was stuck barrel first down in the ground. And even the Cherokee in the Smokies have the stories about what we would consider the fae, or the fairy people, the little people they call them. They believe that there's a race of small beings that inhabit the area. They like to live around areas where there's water and rocks and things like that. And it's almost like the in Rip Van Winkle, the little people that he encountered playing tin pins in the woods in the mountains there. It gives you pause to reflect, that's supposedly the whole thing, that if you disrespect them or their area or their ways, that they're mischief makers. They like to cause trouble. They lead you off into the woods, sometimes never to be found again. It makes you wonder about all those disappearances, right, particularly in the Smokies. But then likewise, there have been people that they've helped, that they've guided out of the woods. So it depends on whether they like you or not. And a lot of the Native Americans will leave offerings to the little people. They like tobacco and chocolate and whiskey. And they'll leave stuff out in the woods. I mean, who doesn't like those three things? But that's, you have that in some of your other cultures. I know in Scandinavia, there's highways that'll go around an outcropping of rocks rather than blasting through it, because they don't want to upset the trolls or gnomes or whatever they believe. And they're serious about that. They'll tell you that's there's the little people that live in those rocks. You don't want to mess with that.
True. I mean, just like in Iceland, you got the Holdi folk, folk, and they'll go all around. They'll build a highway around a bunch of rocks before they'll, disturb rocks, because they don't want to, make the little folk mad. And it's so true. And when you said that about, I wonder if something just fell through a portal only to land in a highway and get hit by a car. It seems so sad, but you think about it, that's sort of what happened to me and my mom when we hit that thing on the road, Dismal Swamp. And that story's in the book. If you want to read that in detail, I still can't tell you what that was. It was the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's a great story. And then similarly, the one from my book that's similar to that happened to one of my cousins. It's called What Did We Run Over? It's in my book, Strange Things in the Woods, and it's also on 13 Past Midnight. I narrate it. Most of those stories or sometimes have a guest narrator come on, but just about all those stories from my books have been narrated over there, and even some that haven't been published yet, like some of the Smoky stories. Started out when I started my channel, I didn't really know what I wanted to narrate, and I thought, well, I've got all these stories, I'll narrate those. And so I narrated about everything from my books, and then I started writing things just to narrate. So eventually that'll appear in a book. So it's kind of come full circle for me. But I love it. I love to write. I love to tell stories. I love to narrate. So I'm in my element here.
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention a couple little things that they're not in your book, but when you said that about falling through the portal, it made me think of something that's real popular right now, is that Outlander show. And I know that's fiction, but think about it, folks. If you pay attention, get around all the soap opera stuff. I love time travel things, but just falling through the stone, and winding up on the other side and coming in on the other side, not just 200 years in the past, but in the middle of a battle. Not all time travel can be, neat and put together, as much as the old movie. Oh gosh, it's a classic, Somewhere in Time, where Christopher Reeve ends up going back in time.
Love that film and the way that was set up. I talked about that where he had to have things around him that were from that time or it wouldn't work. That one instance where he'd travel back and he reached in his pocket for some coins and there was a modern coin in there and suddenly he found himself back in his normal time. And it makes you wonder about that. I've heard stories like there was I think it was in New York, there was a guy that just appeared out of nowhere wearing old-fashioned clothes, and this was, in modern times. He ran out in the street and was hit by a car and perished, and the only thing they found on him was some old coins and currency, yet it looked new, and a ticket for like a livery stable that had actually existed years and years and years before from that same area. So was that somebody that had, accidentally walked through a portal? And you can imagine going from horse and buggy days to modern traffic and just being, so overwhelmed that you'd run out into the street.
Yeah, and you just got to wonder how much of this is happening and how would we know? Just like anything else we said tonight, how do you know? We can theorize, we can guess, we can hope, we can dream, but we still don't really know what's happening. I mean, if there's a chance that you're walking along, just out hiking, having a good time, like David Blighty says, don't be last in line, don't be first in line. Stay in the...
Yeah, don't be first, don't be last, don't wear red, don't pick berries. Stay out of boulder fields. Take a weapon and a personal locator and tell somebody where you're going, when you'll be back, and don't go by yourself if possible.
You and I also talked about this weird sounds that they're hearing. So you had said too about, if there's a rip in time or if there's a portal or a connection in the dimensions, that changes things. It changes everything. I'm not a scientist. I'm far from it. But it's got to change the atmosphere. So even with black-eyed kids, I've heard multiple stories out of the many I've heard that had something to do with almost like a sonic boom sound, like they disappeared, boom, they're gone, so that's a possibility. And all
I've heard it described as a pop too, like a real sharp, like somebody uncapping a bottle or something, a pop, and then things will happen.
That's odd. And I've heard these in the Missing 411. There's several cases of, like, say the guy was standing on the corner talking on the cell phone, and he's saying to his girlfriend, he keeps going in and out, but he's saying, somebody's chasing me, something's, whatever, and she hears just this whoosh, like a big wind that just comes, and he's gone. And the cell phone's there, crushed into pieces. And there's a couple of stories like that. And then you've got a few of them where people that were...
Makes you wonder if they were taken up. And that's what the whooshing noise was. Something just sucked them out of here.
Because something like that's got to be happening. You've got another chapter in your book where it's no footprints in the snow, and little tiny footprints of like almost like baby footprints in the snow that just disappeared in a field. And I know Linda Godfrey's got several in her books, Monsters Among Us, where there was like a bipedal, like obviously it looked like something like a large wolf, but only walking on his back feet, with footprints in the snow that led through the wood line, through the trees, and then into a field and disappeared in the center of the field. And there was nowhere for it to go except down or up because of...
Yeah, that's the same with that story. I think it's called Footprints in the Snow in the book. I'm getting old. I forget sometimes if I don't look through the book back occasionally, and sometimes I'll name it a little differently for narration and things. But yeah, the guy was a kid. He was out in the snow, fresh snowfall. They'd call school off that day, so he was just out bumming around in the woods. And it wasn't even in the deep woods. It was just a semi-rural area, and it was on a farm. And he was walking through a pine thicket, and there were cedars and things there too. And so he came in to where there was a clearing, and then he could see at the edge of the clearing, coming out of the woods, were a small child's bare footprints in the snow. And he said, I've been, a hunter and things ever since I was just a little tyke. and I know a rabbit, I know a squirrel, I know, a dog, any kind of prints. So these were human footprints. I could see the toes, I could see it was just a perfectly formed human foot, but like a baby's foot. It started just out of nowhere at the edge of the clearing, went to the center of the clearing. He says maybe 15, 20 feet across, and in the middle there, it just stopped. And he said, it had to go up or down or out. And I ran back into that guy a few years later and recounted, that tale again. And he said, the more I thought about that, he said, I think that was some kind of heavenly creature, something not of this earth. He's like he talked about cherubim and things like that. He said it was, just little kid, not going to be out running around in the snow barefoot anyway. And for just the prince to start out of nowhere and then disappear out of nowhere. He said it had to be something supernatural. He said just the more I think about that, the more I think it was some sort of angelic being. Now, what it was doing out there in the woods, who knows? But that's his story.
Well, Steve, I don't know if you've heard, but there's some strange things in the woods, man.
Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times.
There's some strange things out there, and I don't know if 20 years from now we'll have any answers, or if we'll be further away from it, because the bullseye keeps moving. If the chat has any questions, we're going to be on here for a few more minutes. If you've got any questions for Steve and or me, I'm more of a ghost lady, but and I've seen some crazy things. I know I can't explain any of them. I mean, I've got more questions than you guys do, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and that's Sysco. You and I have talked about that before. How the fun is in the chase, and just we're not really expecting any answers, because the more we look into this and the more we've studied this, the more questions we have. And that's why I'm not necessarily an investigator or anything. I'm not looking for answers. I'm looking for more stories. I like to hear these, I like to enjoy these. There's just too many people have had too many different experiences, me included, and that's why I don't discount any of these stories. Anything anybody tells me, if I trust the person, and don't think they're just trying to wind me up, I take it at face value, because I've seen all kinds of things that I know just to the average person, or somebody that hadn't delved into the paranormal or the supernatural or even the occult, that there is no rational explanation for. My very first real experience with paranormal, I'd had some minor episodes. I was just barely 6 years old, and I saw what I can only describe as a ghost kid run across the road in front of our house, in front of a car, down into our yard, and then if the child fell, like little kids when they're just learning how to walk and run and things lose control sometimes, ran into the yard, fell down, gone, boom.
Mm.
And it didn't scare me as much as it made me curious. That's not supposed to happen. Little kids don't run across the street from out of nowhere, get into the yard, fall down, and disappear. And I went straight to the spot. I was maybe 100 feet away when it happened. Went right to the spot. There was nothing there, no hole, nothing I could have mistaken for a kid. I even went and got a little shovel and dug around there, but I knew there wasn't any hole or anything there.
Well, I'll joke with you and say, and you've been having that shovel, digging ever since.
I've had my little shovel. It was like one of those little kids shovels, like a little sand shovel. Yeah. I've still got that little shovel in my hand all these years, and I'm still digging in those holes looking for the ghost kids. But, it set me on a lifelong journey.
Exactly.
Of looking into this and hearing things. And years later, I told my grandmother about that, and she said, well, that's just whatever is out there way of letting you know that you're different, and sometimes you'll see things that other people don't see. Sometimes it's meant for you. Sometimes you're seeing something that's meant for somebody else, but you have the ability to see it too.
Exactly.
And that goes a long way. And because sometimes there's not any reason in anything like that. Sometimes something will be a warning or an omen or a portent or meant to tell you something or show you something. And then other times it just is.
Yeah. Life's a mystery, and I mean, we like to tell ourselves that we understand them, and you and I have talked many times and said, we think we got it in a little file cabinet with all our little files, and we got to move it. Go, well, this kind of bleeds over to this one, and this one kind of like bleeds into this one. Like Sandra Miller here is saying that she's seen shadow people. I have too. And but what were they? And are all shadow people the same? Because I know that from experience, I know that ghosts can come in, and that's the only way they can manifest is you just see a shadow of them, or you see a form of a mist or a half manifestation, and they can appear to be shadow people. Or shadow people are, I believe, this is just my opinion, extra dimensional beings. And what is extra dimension?
Well, I heard one story of a shadow person that it was during a storm, and the power was out, and the lady said she saw what looked like a spider on a web coming down from the ceiling, and she thought that's what it was. But when it got to the ground, that web, that little shimmering piece of web, it expanded into the shape of a person and walked through the wall. And she was sharing a room with her sister, and she said, well, I won't wake my sister, but I wonder what that was. And she said about that time, my sister, who was awake, and she didn't know it, said, did you see that? So they both saw it, but it just like a little string of nothing, a thread, and it turned into a shadow and walked. So what in the world is that?
Many accounts of...
Let's say hi to a few more people who got Tom, looks like FEMA. Super Blackbird Pite, hello. Muffy, thanks for joining us. Sandra, Susie Norton. Vez, sorry you're having trouble with your connection here, but thank you for modding. But yeah, we're going to have to wrap it up here. We've been on a little over an hour and a half. But I appreciate everybody coming by tonight. I think we kind of got off into the storytelling. And so Bill had wanted me to talk about my books. And I'm like, well, I don't want to go on and just talk about my books. So Sysco had the idea that she come on and talk to me about them. But she's done a good job. Thanks, Sysco, for coming on. Check out her book. I think, I don't know if it's not in the links, it will be, but I'll have a link to my books and her book too. Her book is We Are All Children in the Wilderness of the Afterlife, Guided Tour Through a Haunted Life. Did I get it right?
Got it right. You got it right.
It's a mouthful. I trip over it sometimes. Mine, Strange Things in the Woods, and then the other book that I have out, when I first started going on to these shows and radio and things and talking about it, the first book, either the callers or the host would invariably ask, well, what about you, Steve? Have you ever had anything happen to you? And I would tell, my stories about different things that's happened to me. And I sat down eventually with those and thought, I probably got enough here for a book. And I did. That's also the book, My Strange World, which is my own personal encounters. All those stories are things that happened to me, encounters that happened to me. I've narrated some of those too on my channel, 13 Past Midnight. If you look in the description, it'll tell you which book it's from. If it's from Strange Things in the Woods or More Strange Things in the Woods, those are other people's stories. And that was actually a separate book. Strange Things in the Woods was 2 separate books. When I went with this publisher to have it put out in paperback, they combined both those into one. So you're actually getting a good deal. You're getting 2 books there for the price of one. And then the third book, My Strange World. So check those out. Appreciate it. I've got author copies on the way. It just came out in paperback recently. And really surprised me. It went to number 1 in its category on Amazon. It hit the top of their new release list. It's doing really, really well. And I appreciate everybody that's already bought a copy. Later on, when I get my author's copies, I will be giving some away on this channel and on my channel. So keep an eye out for that. They told me it'd be a few more weeks because of the lockdown and everything before I have them. Also, I've got something coming up, a little collaboration with the Silverbridge Coffee Company. They're in Gallipoli, Ohio, Mothman country there. They actually have some coffee that's named after Mothman. They have the Mothman blend. And I'm doing a little promotion that they want to do with me, where I'm going to be giving away some coffee coming up. So if you've got any coffee drinkers in the house, stay tuned over the next couple of weeks. Going to have a nice little giveaway from the Silverbridge Coffee Company. Probably do something special about the Mothman and then use that promotion to tie in with that. So if you've got any Mothman stories and Mothman sites, if you've got any stories that you'd like to hear, we love doing the listener stories channel on this, the stories on this channel. Um, you can send those to Bill at disappearanceof@gmail.com. He can gets them all compiled together, sends the script over to me, and I record it, and then he makes a video for it. So watch out for those. We've got another episode on the way of that coming soon. I think we've got enough for another stories. Terry Brown, that's here in the chat. Thank you, sir. Got another great story from him coming up on this channel this week about a ghostly camping trip that I think y'all are really going to enjoy. He's an excellent writer. There's a story of his that I just narrated and put up over on my channel yesterday, I believe it was. It all kind of runs together here for me. I'm one of these that I stay up all night and work throughout the night. I'm most creative between midnight, about 4 or 5 a.m., and then I'll nap for a couple hours and get back up and start all over. Don't sleep much, never have. So one day kind of runs into the other. But I did put video up on my channel, me narrating one of Terry Brown's stories there. It's called The Smoking Ghost of in the Delta 88. But a nice, creepy story about a haunted car, and it's true. He's the person that it happened to. So go over to my channel, give that a listen. Sysco, what's going on with you? What have you got coming up in the future?
I've got some more interviews on Journey Through the Gate, Paranormal Portal podcast. If you like ghost stories, doing a series on the Great Awakening too. So if that's not your cup of tea, just go past those and look for the ghost story interviews. Steve co-hosts with me sometimes on that. The book is doing great. In fact, I'd like to say hi to Jose. He's in the chat. He left.
Yeah, I meant to say hi to Jose. He helps us out with KPNL a lot. He's always in the Discord over there. And that's another person we need to shout out. Lady Ann over at KPNL. Sysco and I do a lot of voiceovers and things over there for her, do some behind-the-scenes stuff. I also produce and edit videos, and I've done some things for that channel. Go over to kpnl-db.com, digital radio. Some of the best paranormal podcasts play over there. She plays some of my videos. She plays Sysco's shows, several other podcasts that she has repeats of Into the Fray with Shannon LeGros and Phantoms and Monsters with Lon Strickler. Just lots of good stuff. The rest of the time plays some old classic spooky jazz, and have the old time radio on, I think it's Saturday or Sunday nights. I can't remember on that one. Don't quote me on that one. But there is one day that's old time radio, and but it's worth a listen. KPNL-DB.com.
Yep, it's good stuff. And you can usually find Jose on the Discord chat in there. And Jose left me a lovely review. He read my book, and I'd like to thank him for that. Thank you for that. 5 stars, Jose. I appreciate you, love. And absolutely think about the things we've said tonight. If you've got any stories, things that have happened to you in the woods, or you've got ghost stories, please let me know. You can catch me over there on Facebook. It's Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal Podcast Gatekeepers, or go ahead and just send me a journeythroughthegate@gmail.com, or connect with Steve or whatever. I'd love to hear your ghost stories. That's my passion, because I think it's something that we haven't figured out. We've all got different connections to it. Some people are scared, and a lot of times things that happen in your house, it might be a human ghost, or it might just be somebody trying to give you a message, or there's a lot of entities out there that you just don't want to mess with, like we said, in the woods. And scary, strange things just aren't in the woods. They're
everywhere. Yeah, and people ask me about that. Why is strange things in the woods? Well, I've got, I could do strange things on the farm. I could do strange things in the city, strange things in the house, strange things in the yard, strange things in the air. Yeah. Just for that first book, the woods just seemed to be the common thing that spoke to me. I had those stories, just to start with. I've got a lot more stories that'll be coming out. But that one I don't know if I picked it or if it picked me, but that was kind of the theme that I went with for the first 2 books that are now the one big book. But Sysco, what's your Twitter handle?
At Sysco's Gate. It's Syscos. Gate, Gate, at Sysco's Gate on Twitter. But yeah, and I think that's one of the things too, is we're all connected to this in one way or another. We all want to know what's happening to the missing people. I think it's because we put that human connection into it. It's like, well, not only do we feel bad for the families and the people that have lost someone, and you never get an answer, you never get that closure, but it also it bleeds over into the ghost stories and the hauntings and things like that too. We all want that answer of what happens to us, in the afterlife. Is there an afterlife? Can our loved ones okay, or am I going to be okay? So all of these things really connect. It brings that human factor into it. And Steve, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you to everybody in the chat. And I hope to do this again. Maybe we'll do it just on ghost stories and things like that. Maybe we collect up some.
Yeah, I've missed a few weeks here, but I'd been doing the weekly Campfire Stories things. We'll get those going again. It'll be probably Friday or Saturday nights. May do a pop-up here and there through the week, but I'll try to let you know in advance as much as possible. You can find me on Twitter at Strange and Odd. Email address is Steve Stockton and the number 81, Steve Stockton 81 at gmail.com. My channel, 13 Past Midnight. Sysco's channel, Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal Podcast. And if you have stories, we want to hear them. And it's just like Sysco said, we're here for community, for support, for camaraderie, if you will. You won't be judged here. We want to hear anybody's story. For this channel, it's disappearanceof@gmail.com. That'll get you on the listener stories here. Here, these tend to be more strange things in national parks and national forest type things. We'll take any kind of story, though. But if you want to be over on my channel where it's more of a supernatural, more cult-flavored type story, then we can put you over there, too. We can put you on some things I put on both channels. There's a few videos I have over there that are on this channel, too. So I'd like to try to, catch as many as I can, even if there is a little overlap. But Steve Stockton 81 at gmail.com, disappearanceof@gmail.com, or catch Sysco and I. We're active on Facebook, too. Want to shout out High Strangeness Facebook group. Sorry, Nicole Willis. I accidentally called her Williams the other night when I was on the Secret Society. But she's a wonderful lady. She's set up a group over there just for people like us. It's a private group. Again, it's a place where you can come in and share and talk about things and not worried about being judged or ridiculed or anything like that. We're open to everything. We're just, in a way, we believe in everything, and in a way, we believe in nothing. It's just, it is what it is. That's what I like to tell people. Your mileage may vary, but thanks again, everybody.
Everybody,
stay safe.
Any portals, and if you do, I hope you wind up on the good side of things, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And if anybody wants to subscribe to my channel, all you got to do is hit the chat here. It'll take you right, hit my link here on the chat. It'll take you right to my channel. And there's a lot of great stories and a lot of great monster stories and everything that Steve's told over on my channel. It's great stuff. So thank you again to everybody. And sorry about the technical difficulties, but we got here. So good night, Steve.
Yep. Good night, Sysco. Thanks again. Good night, everybody. Good morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Steve Stockton. I love each and every one of you, and I'll talk to you next time. Watch for new videos coming up this week. All right. Good night, everybody.